I used to believe my mother was the strongest woman in the world. Caroline Turner wasn't like the other moms in Portland, Maine. She didn't pack tidy lunches with notes in the bags or spend Saturday mornings volunteering at school events. She wasn't steady in that way. Instead, she was wild, unpredictable, like the ocean that crashed against the rocky shoreline just a few miles from our house. She had once been a singer in a smoky bar downtown, her voice strong and sultry, her dresses tight, her lipstick always the wrong shade of red. She gave it all up when my father left and I came along. She told me once that raising me was her greatest performance. "It's just you and me, Soph," she would say, pulling me close, her perfume sharp and sweet. "No one else matters." I was too young to realize that sometimes she meant it as love, and sometimes she meant it as a threat. When I was 11, I had already learned to measure my words, to watch her face for clues. If her smile was too wide, if her eyes were darting, if she hummed old songs under her breath, I knew I had to be careful. One wrong word, and she'd lash out, not always with her hands, but with her voice, sharp enough to slice me open. "Ungrateful," she'd spit, or, "Don't make me regret giving up everything for you." That rainy October night in 2005, I sat in the back seat of her Buick, my sneakers tapping nervously against the floorboard. The car smelled faintly of cigarettes, though she always insisted she'd quit. The wipers screeched across the windshield, struggling to keep up with the heavy drops. We had pulled into a strip mall that looked like it was holding on to life by a thread. Half the stores boarded up, a single flickering streetlight above the ATM. Mom gripped her purse and stepped out into the rain. I watched her, always half afraid she might vanish if I blinked too long. That's when I saw him. A man standing near the alley, his hood pulled low, his shoulders hunched. He wasn't just loitering, he was watching her, watching us. "Mom," I whispered, leaning forward, tugging her sleeve before she opened the door all the way. "He's staring at you." She laughed softly, the way she did when she wanted to dismiss my fears. "Don't be silly, Sophie. People look. That's what they do." But my stomach nodded. Something about the man's eyes, sharp, darting, made the air feel heavier. Mom strode toward the ATM, unfazed, while I pressed my face against the window, unable to look away. The next few moments unfolded like a nightmare I'd had too many times. The man lunged at her, knocking her against the concrete, his hand ripping at her purse. Mom screamed, her voice swallowed by the storm. I scrambled out of the car, shouting, "Leave her alone!" But before I could move closer, his rough hands gripped my shoulders. "Shut up or she dies," he snarled. I froze, tears streaking my cheeks, my whole body trembling. But before he could drag me farther, my mother erupted. Not with fear, but with rage I'd never seen before. She clawed at his arm like a wild animal, shrieking, "Don't touch what's mine!" The man staggered, startled by her violent strength, and fled into the rain, disappearing down the alley. Mom collapsed on the wet pavement, her lips split, her eyes blazing with something that terrified me even more than the attacker had. Bystanders rushed over. Someone wrapped me in a blanket, someone else dialed 911. But as the police questioned us, my mother's voice grew louder, more erratic. She accused the officers of being in on it, accused me of inviting trouble by opening the car door. Her words didn't make sense, but she clung to them like they were the only thing holding her together. That was the night I stopped believing my mother was the strongest woman in the world. That was the night I began to wonder if she was the most dangerous. The days after the mugging were a blur. Everyone at school wanted to know what had happened. I told them the short version. Some guy tried to rob us, but we're fine now, because the truth was too heavy to share. Mom, though, spiraled. At first, she refused to sleep, pacing the house at night, peeking through blinds every few minutes. Then she began locking the doors with extra padlocks she bought from the hardware store. She hammered one onto the basement door, another onto my bedroom door, on the outside. "Just in case," she said, smiling tightly. The mirrors came next. She draped sheets over every reflective surface in the house, muttering about eyes in the glass. I tried to peel one back in the bathroom so I could brush my hair, but she caught me. Her hand clamped down on my wrist, nails digging into my skin. "Do you want them to see us?" she hissed. I didn't ask who they were. I knew better. The worst were the drills. She called them safety drills, like it was some kind of game. She would shove me into the closet, padlock the door, and demand that I stay silent until she let me out. Sometimes it was 10 minutes, sometimes it was 2 hours. I'd sit in the dark, knees pulled to my chest, fighting tears because if I cried too loudly, she'd call me weak. "Better you hate me now than get taken later," she'd say when she finally opened the door. At school, I jumped at footsteps in the hallway, flinched whenever a teacher raised their voice. My friends drifted away, tired of my excuses for why I couldn't hang out after class. One afternoon, my teacher noticed the bruises around my wrist. I mumbled something about tripping, but she didn't buy it. The next week, social services showed up. I remember the day they took me like it was yesterday. A woman with kind eyes and a clipboard came to the classroom. She knelt beside my desk and whispered, "Sophie, we're going to take a little trip." My stomach dropped. I wanted to scream, to cling to my chair, but something inside me also exhaled with relief. They brought me to a foster family, the Millers. Their house smelled like cinnamon and laundry detergent. They gave me a real bed, tucked me in with a quilt, and asked me what my favorite breakfast was. For the first time in years, I felt warmth without conditions, but nothing good lasted with my mom. She fought in court, cried on the witness stand, told the judge how much she loved me. She painted herself as a victim of trauma, a mother who only wanted to protect her daughter from a dangerous world. With therapy and medication, they granted her supervised visits. I sat across from her in sterile visiting rooms, her smile stretched too wide. "You know they can't keep us apart forever," she whispered once. "It's you and me, Soph. Always." I nodded, because that's what she wanted. But deep down, I was already learning that sometimes the person you're supposed to run to is the one you need to escape from. The visits started once a week. Mom would show up with cookies she claimed to have baked, though sometimes they were clearly from the store. She'd hug me too tightly, her perfume overwhelming. She'd whisper things like, "Don't listen to them," or "They just want to keep us apart." The supervisors watched, but Mom had a way of slipping past their notice. Her words were quiet enough, her smile convincing enough. To them, she was a grieving mother trying her best. To me, she was a storm waiting to break. One afternoon, during a visit, she leaned close and said, "You think they'll protect you? They can't. No one can. It's only me." I didn't respond. I stared at the table, counting the scratches in the wood. She slammed her hand down, making the supervisor jump. "Look at me when I'm talking to you," she snapped, before quickly pasting a smile back on her face. "Sorry, I miss her so much." I knew the act by heart. At the Miller's house, I tried to settle into normal life. Mrs. Miller taught me how to bake banana bread. Mr. Miller showed me how to ride a bike without wobbling. Their daughter Claire invited me to her sleepovers. For a while I pretended I belonged, but Mom's shadow followed me. One night the phone rang. Mrs. Miller answered, her brow furrowing. She handed it to me reluctantly. "It's your mom." My hand shook as I pressed the receiver to my ear. Her voice was low, urgent. "They can't keep you forever. Pack a bag, I'll come get you," I whispered. "I can't." Her breath hitched, then turned sharp. "Ungrateful. After everything I've done, you'd rather live with strangers than your own mother?" I hung up, tears stinging my eyes. Mrs. Miller pulled me into a hug, but I felt guilt pressing down on me. I loved my mom, but I was terrified of her. At school, I started therapy sessions. The counselor asked me to draw how I felt. I sketched a house with padlocks on every door. She asked, "Who's inside?" "Me," I whispered. The counselor's eyes softened. "Do you want to get out?" I didn't answer. I didn't know if I could. The older I got, the clearer the memories became. That night at the ATM replayed in my mind endlessly. Not the man who attacked us, but my mother's face. The wildness in her eyes, the animalistic scream. I realized the real terror hadn't been outside us. It had been inside her all along. Even as I grew into a teenager, Mom's grip lingered. She'd send letters from therapy, each one swinging between love and accusation. "I'm proud of you, Soph," one would say, followed by, "Don't let them poison you against me." I'd rip them up, but the words always stuck. When I turned 16, the court gave me a choice: stay with the Millers permanently or attempt reunification with my mom. I didn't hesitate. I chose the Millers. Mom screamed in the courtroom, her voice echoing, "She's mine! You can't steal her!" The judge's gavel slammed, but her words rang in my ears for years. I graduated high school, went to college out of state, and tried to build a life. But fear followed me. I flinched in parking lots. I locked my dorm room door 3 times before bed. I avoided mirrors at night. Friends would ask, "Why are you so jumpy?" I'd shrug. I never told them the whole story. How could I? How could I explain that my mother's love felt like a cage? Now, as an adult, I look back and see it all more clearly. My mother wasn't a monster all the time. She tucked me in at night, sang lullabies, brushed my hair when I was sick. But love twisted by paranoia and control can become something unrecognizable. I still visit Portland sometimes, though I don't see her. She's older now, quieter, the fire dimmed by years of medication. I hear she lives in a group home, still muttering about conspiracies. Sometimes I wonder if she ever thinks of me, if she regrets the storms she brought into my childhood. I'll never know. What I do know is this: the night of the mugging, when she screamed like an animal and saved me, was also the night she revealed the truth. The danger wasn't strangers lurking in alleys. The danger was trusting someone who couldn't see where love ended and control began. Fear doesn't always come from outside. Sometimes it lives in the people we love the most. Trust must be earned, not demanded. And no matter how strong the bond of family feels, it is never wrong to step away when love becomes a prison. I remember the first time I realized my life wasn't normal, though at the time I thought it was. I was 8, standing on a narrow stage in Los Angeles, the bright lights making the sweat on my forehead glitter like tiny diamonds. The audience wasn't cheering for me, they were cheering for my mother's dream. Veronica Weiss had been an actress once, a hopeful Hollywood starlet with 2 high heels and 2 big ambitions, but Hollywood had spit her out. She had promised herself that if she couldn't shine, I would. And shine I would, whether I wanted to or not. "Lift your chin, Clara," she said, her voice sharp, slicing through the music like a knife. "Do you want to look like a rag doll again?" I tried. I forced my lips into a grin that felt more like a scream. My little body trembled from exhaustion, my sequined dress pinching me in places I didn't even know could hurt. Everyone else saw a girl in a pageant, sparkling and poised. I saw a cage, built inch by inch with rules I didn't understand and punishments I could feel in my chest. My father had left years ago. He'd called her unhinged before vanishing from our lives. At 6, I had thought he was a coward. Now I knew he'd been right. Mom had built a fortress around us, and I was trapped inside. She said he abandoned us because he didn't believe in my talent. I believed it. Every diet, every rehearsal, every forced smile was proof I owed her my life. At home, she controlled everything. Mirrors lined the walls so I could see every twitch of my face. Shoes had to be worn even when my feet ached, meals measured to the calorie. She paced behind me like a drill sergeant, correcting posture, smile, and even my breathing. "Pain makes you perfect," she'd snap when I winced. "Stars don't get messy, Clara. They shine." I learned quickly that hiding dreams was dangerous. When I dared to sketch buildings in a notebook under my bed, she found it, ripped the pages, and said, "Stop wasting time with childish fantasies. You were born to be seen, not to build." Even then, I clung to hope. Maybe someday things would feel normal. Maybe she'd see me as her daughter, not her puppet. By the time I was 12, my childhood had been carved away piece by piece. Birthdays were replaced with rehearsals. Sleepovers were forbidden. Cake was an enemy. Every night I would lie awake listening to her typing on her laptop or muttering to herself in the kitchen. I didn't dare move. I didn't dare breathe too loudly. One day at school, a classmate asked if I wanted to go to a movie. My first real invite since the 5th grade. I panicked. I didn't know how to say yes without inviting her wrath. I have homework, I lied, voice shaking. She frowned but didn't push. I was grateful. Mom noticed everything. One look at my face and she'd know. You smiled too long at the wrong person today, she accused one night, brushing her fingers over my cheek like a surgeon. Remember, every gesture counts. Every flaw is a disaster waiting to happen. I hated her for it sometimes, and other times I hated myself for being weak enough to obey. Her ambitions were mine, and mine alone didn't matter. I didn't want to be a model. I wanted to design buildings, create spaces that breathed life. But in our apartment, architecture wasn't glamorous. It wasn't applause. And in her eyes, if it wasn't applause, it was worthless. The competitions began to feel like battlefields. Every time I stepped on stage, I could hear her whispers slicing into my brain. Smile wider, Clara. Don't disappoint me. Every judge's applause felt hollow. Every victory felt like a funeral. At 14, things escalated. Regional competitions were grueling. I trained for hours each day, posing, walking, smiling, counting calories, correcting expressions. Mom would hover, counting every step, every word. Then came Madeline. She was everything I was supposed to be, confident, sparkling, unflinching. I lost to her and I cried backstage. Maybe I'm not good enough, I whispered. Mom held me tightly. You are, she murmured. Don't forget it. We're unstoppable. But the next day, the world changed. Madeline collapsed in her hotel room. Poison, the rumors said. I didn't know what to think until I saw the vial in Mom's purse, crushed pills shining in the sunlight through the hotel window. Mom, what did you do? I asked, shaking. She smiled calmly. I removed the obstacle. One day you'll thank me. I didn't know if I should be horrified or afraid. All the victories I had, the applause, the smiles, they suddenly felt empty. They had a cost I wasn't willing to pay, yet she expected me to embrace it as if it were normal. I tried to speak out once. A social worker, a judge, anyone who would listen. Mom charmed them effortlessly. She was devoted, concerned, loving, the perfect mother. Behind closed doors, I shrank smaller each day, trapped under her gaze, carrying a secret that felt heavier than the world. I stopped eating. I avoided mirrors. At night, she would sit at the foot of my bed, whispering, "We're unstoppable, you and I, don't betray me." I would nod, paralyzed, too afraid to move. I knew there was no escape, not yet. Even school became a prison. Teachers commented on my quietness, on my frail frame. They didn't know the real reason. They saw a girl dedicated to excellence. They didn't see the girl hiding under the sequins, trembling from exhaustion and fear. Friends drifted away. I couldn't meet them for ice cream, for parties, for sleepovers. They didn't understand and I couldn't explain. The cage had walls no one else could see. It took years to finally leave, and even then, the fear lingered. I turned 18, got a scholarship for architecture, and moved to another city. Mom's calls came often at first. "Don't forget who made you," she'd say. "You're nothing without me." I blocked her number. I left the mirror-lined apartment behind. I built a life in my own hands. College became my sanctuary. I started drawing again, designing buildings that had light and air, not mirrors and judgment. Even now, years later, I flinch when someone applauds me too loudly, or when a voice hovers behind me reminding me of perfection. But I survived. I built boundaries, sought therapy, and found friends who saw me for me, not for my mother's ambitions. Looking back, I realized the cost of ambition without love. My mother's obsession with fame and control nearly destroyed me, but it also taught me resilience, caution, and the importance of autonomy. Ambition should never come at the expense of another's soul. Love should lift, not bind. And no success, no applause, no trophy, no title is worth the destruction of a child's spirit. I always thought my life was normal, or at least as normal as it could be in Burlington, Vermont. I'm Lily Carter, and I was 12 when I first realized the world outside my home was a place I could never fully enter. My mother, Monica, had always been the center of everything. She was the kind of parent everyone envied on the surface, polite, charming, attentive. But beneath that perfect smile was a suffocating force I couldn't escape. Mom had grown up alone, an only child in a house where rules were ironclad and affection was rationed. I learned all of that later, piecing together the fragments she never said aloud. To the neighbors, she was devoted. To me, she was every door that slammed a little too hard, every look that froze me in place, every phone call she intercepted. Dad left when I was 6, and she told me, more than once, that she had saved me from abandonment. But what she really did was make me dependent. Friends were dangerous, according to her. Anyone outside the family threatened our bond, our sacred world. It was a Friday evening when Emily texted me about a birthday sleepover. I was so excited I nearly squealed into the phone. Balloons, cake, movies. I imagined a night where I could laugh, actually laugh, and not feel the weight pressing down on my chest. But that joy evaporated the instant I heard the floorboards creak behind me. Mom didn't knock. She never knocked. "Who are you texting, Lily?" she said, her voice calm, like ice sliding over glass. "Just Emily. She's having a party," I said, trying to sound casual, though my stomach turned. "And you think you're going?" Her eyes narrowed, scanning my face for signs of rebellion. I knew what came next before she even said it. Her idea of protection wasn't about keeping me safe from strangers. It was about keeping me inside her world, where she had control over every thought, every smile, every movement. That night, I sat in my room with my sketch pad, trying to drown my fear in colors. Mom stood outside the door, silent but present. I knew she was listening to my breathing, judging my imagination. I felt trapped in a cage made of love and fury, and I hated myself for feeling guilty for wanting to breathe. The first real punishment came when I dared to mention a classmate. I don't remember the exact words, only Mom's expression, eyes hard, jaw tight, and that tone that made the room shrink around me. "You think you can just replace me with them?" she had said. I couldn't answer. I had learned early that answers weren't required. Submission was. By the time I was 10, Mom had installed a new set of rules. No sleepovers, no unsupervised phone calls, no letters from friends. She'd even deleted my apps one by one. Every attempt I made to reach out to anyone outside our home was met with a punishment, usually hours of writing apologies, 10 pages of confessions, 10 pages of reminders that my loyalty was owed only to her. She would watch me write, pacing behind my chair, eyes piercing, waiting for me to falter. School was my escape. I drew during recess, sketched faces of kids laughing, imagined what it would be like to be part of something, but Mom's shadow followed me. If I mentioned my art or a classmate's kindness at home, she would tighten her grip on the narrative. The first time I tried to sneak out to see the neighborhood kids, I didn't even make it to the sidewalk. Mom caught me instantly, dragging me back through the front door. I expected yelling, but instead she leaned close, her breath cold on my ear, whispering, "Every time you look at them, you're telling me I'm not enough. Don't you forget who saved you when your father abandoned us?" I learned quickly that freedom was a lie. Laughter, play, curiosity, these were dangerous. By the time I was 12, I had developed a system, whispered calls, hidden notebooks, and art that spoke what I couldn't. Emily was my lifeline, though I had to hide even our text messages. One afternoon when I thought Mom was out, I sent a quick note. "Can I come over this weekend?" Mom appeared suddenly like she always did. She snatched my phone and ripped it from my hands. "You ungrateful little snake. I gave you life and you choose them over me?" Tears stung my eyes, but I tried to explain. "I just want a friend, Mom." "You don't need friends. You have me. That's enough." She slammed the phone down like it weighed more than my body. That night, I wrote 20 pages of apologies, my wrist burning, my head spinning. The words felt meaningless, but I had no choice. School became my sanctuary. My art teacher, Ms. Parker, noticed the darkening tones in my drawings, the cages, the faceless figures, the locked doors. She asked questions gently, a few words here, a smile there. I trusted her cautiously. When I finally confided a fraction of what home life was like, she believed me. For the first time, someone outside my mother's control saw my fear and pain. Child Services intervened after Ms. Parker reported the situation. Mom smiled sweetly when the authorities came, that same practiced devotion everyone else saw. But I knew. I could feel her fury simmering beneath the surface. Quiet, patient, waiting. For weeks I stayed with a temporary foster family. Freedom was dizzying. Bike rides, laughter, cake at a friend's birthday, small joys I had never realized I craved. My drawings lightened, faces became visible, skies weren't always gray, but shadows lingered. Every time I tried to reach out to friends, a voice in my head whispered, "Betrayal, betrayal." Mom had left marks deeper than bruises, deeper than punishment. It wasn't just control, it was a psychological claim. She had trained me to fear independence, to believe connection meant danger. The world outside was supposed to be safe, but I couldn't shake the feeling of eyes at the window, of hands I couldn't see, of words I couldn't silence. As I grew older, the scars remained invisible, but persistent. Trust didn't come easily. I studied psychology in high school to understand what had happened, to make sense of the fear that still gripped me whenever someone got too close. Mom faded from my daily life, but her echoes lingered in every boundary I set too tightly, in every cautious smile. Eventually, I moved to a city far from Burlington. The apartment I rented was mine, truly mine. I painted, I laughed, I learned how to be a friend without fear. And sometimes, in the quiet hours, I could feel a faint twinge of relief, realizing that survival didn't mean forgetting. It meant understanding, healing, and claiming my life. I learned that protection can sometimes masquerade as possession, that love can become a cage, and that boundaries are not just rules, they are lifelines. Even in the darkest control, escape is possible, and even when shadows linger, choosing freedom is always worth the risk. True love and care are never controlling or suffocating. Protecting someone doesn't mean trapping them. Freedom, trust, and healthy relationships are the real measures of devotion. I grew up in a house where order was more important than love. At least that's what it felt like. My earliest memory isn't of laughter or hugs. It's of my mother tapping a clipboard with her pen, watching me chew. 20 times, she'd say. Not 19, not 21. Even the simplest act of swallowing food came with rules that could not be broken. It was Dublin, 2011, and I was 11 years old. To anyone outside, we looked like the perfect family. My dad worked long shifts at the printing press, steady and quiet. My little sister Maya had the same dark hair and curious eyes I did, though hers carried more fear than curiosity. And my mother, Rowena, kept everything looking spotless. The curtains were always pressed, the grass trimmed, the dinner plates shining in the cabinet. Neighbors would smile and say, "Oh, the Bennetts are such a neat family." They had no idea. Mom had once been a teacher at a private school. People said she was brilliant, firm but fair. That's not how the parents saw it. Too many kids came home crying. Too many complaints about excessive control. They let her go, and something broke in her that never came back. All that discipline she used in the classroom, she brought it home and magnified it 100 times. My dad never fought her. He just kept his head down, maybe too tired from work, maybe too afraid. At night, I'd hear him clear his throat like he wanted to speak, but then silence would fall. I loved writing stories. It was my escape. I had a little blue notebook I kept tucked under my mattress, filled with tales about heroes and adventures far away from home. If Mom ever found it, she called it nonsense. "Stories don't feed families, Lucas," she'd snap. "Discipline does. Remember that." So I wrote quietly when she wasn't around, holding on to words like they were oxygen. Every moment in our house had its place. Wake up at 6 sharp, breakfast at 7, shoes lined up like soldiers in the hallway. Bathroom breaks were timed. Even brushing our teeth had an order: hair first, teeth second, or else. If Maya forgot, Mom would slap the toothbrush out of her hand. Sometimes at night I'd hear her pacing the hallway, whispering to herself, "If I don't keep order, everything falls apart. Everything." Her footsteps always paused at my door, and I'd hold my breath until they moved again. I knew even then something was wrong with her. But when you're a kid, you think wrong is normal if you live in it long enough. The punishments were small at first. Forget to tuck in a chair. 10 minutes standing in the corner. Shoes left out of line. Balance them on your head until your neck ached. One night I tried to go to bed early. School had worn me down and I just wanted to sleep. Mom burst into my room, her shadow falling over the doorway. "Do you think you control the schedule?" she demanded. "I'm just tired, Mom," I said softly. "Do you decide bedtime? Or do I?" "You do." "Exactly. Weakness is failure. And I won't raise a failure." She made me stand on one leg while redoing my homework, recording it all on her phone so she could review my effort. My legs shook so bad the pencil scratched the page. Maya tried to sneak me a glass of water, but Mom caught her. "Don't interfere. Let your brother learn." Her voice was ice. That night I lay awake thinking about running away. But where would I go? Dad was never home, and Maya was too little to leave behind. So I stayed. At school, I carried the rules with me. I sat straight as a rod, hands folded neatly, afraid of making the smallest mistake. My teachers praised me for being polite and disciplined, but inside I was cracking. During group projects, my hands trembled if I thought I might mess up. I'd freeze the same way I froze at home when Mom's eyes were on me. One teacher noticed. Mrs. Byrne, my English teacher, asked me to stay after class one day. "Lucas," she said gently, "you always look so nervous. Is something going on at home?" I forced a smile. "No, ma'am. Everything's fine." But she kept looking at me with those kind eyes, and something inside me broke. My voice came out in a whisper. "She makes us follow rules, all the time. Even how we chew." Mrs. Byrne leaned forward. "Who does?" "My mom." The words tasted dangerous, but once I spoke them, I couldn't stop. It took weeks before anything happened. Mrs. Byrne must have told someone because one afternoon 2 people came to school to talk to me. They introduced themselves as social workers. Their voices were calm, their eyes serious. "We're just here to make sure you're safe, Lucas," one of them said. Safe. The word felt like a fantasy. At home, Mom seemed to sense something. She was sharper than ever, more watchful. She checked our rooms every night, searching for disorder. She even inspected my hands, making sure my fingernails were trimmed evenly. One evening, she caught Maya humming at the dinner table. Just humming. "Quiet," Mom snapped, slamming her fork against the plate. "Meals are for eating, not noise." Maya's eyes filled with tears. I wanted to speak up, but my throat locked. Later that night, I whispered to Maya under our covers. "One day, it'll be better, I promise." "How?" she asked. "I don't know yet. But it has to." The next week, the social workers came to the house. Mom welcomed them with a smile polished bright, her hair perfect, her voice sugary. She called us her angels and told stories about how much we loved her schedules. But they weren't fooled. They saw the charts taped to the fridge, the notebooks full of recorded punishments. They asked questions. Dad sat in the corner, silent, like always. After they left, Mom's mask cracked. She turned to me, eyes blazing. "Did you tell them? Did you betray me?" "No, Mom," I said quickly. "I didn't say anything." Her stare cut through me, long and sharp. Finally, she turned away. But that night, she paced the hallway longer than usual, muttering under her breath. The breaking point came on a rainy Tuesday. I'd left my school bag tilted against the wall instead of perfectly upright. When Mom saw it, she erupted. "You think rules are a joke?" she shouted. "I forgot." "Forgot? There is no forgetting." She yanked the bag, dumping my books across the floor. "Pick them up. Do it again. Do it right." My hands shook as I stacked the books. She slapped one out of my hand. "Again." Maya stood in the doorway, crying. That night I couldn't take it anymore. I told Mrs. Byrne everything, the punishments, the recording, the rules that strangled us. She listened without interrupting, her face pale. When I finished, she said softly, "You did the right thing, Lucas. We're going to help." A week later, social services came with the police. Mom tried to fight, tried to claim she was just a loving mother teaching discipline. But the evidence was too strong. The notebooks, the recordings, even the neighbors who admitted they'd heard shouting through the walls, they took her away. I thought I'd feel free. Instead, I felt empty. Dad tried to step up. He let us eat cereal at night if we wanted, let us leave our shoes in a messy pile by the door. But freedom felt strange. I sat at the table stiff as ever, waiting for rules that never came. Every clock tick made my skin crawl, like Mom's eyes were still watching. Maya adjusted quicker. She laughed more, played louder, tested limits. I envied her. For me, the rules never really left. Years later, I became a writer. I chased the dream I once hid under my mattress. I filled pages with worlds far from ours, where kids fought dragons instead of dinner schedules. People said my stories had discipline and control, like every word was lined up in formation. They didn't know where that came from. Even now, when I sit down to write, I hear her voice. Not good enough. Not perfect. I keep writing anyway. Because surviving her meant finding my own voice, even if hers still echoes. Control without love is not discipline. It is cruelty. What looks like order from the outside can be a cage on the inside. I learned that freedom is messy, imperfect, and sometimes terrifying. But it is always better than living by fear. Children do not grow in the shadow of punishment. They grow in the light of compassion. And when love is replaced by obsession, it isn't love at all. I don't remember when the house on Cedarbrook Drive stopped feeling like home and started feeling like a stage. Maybe it was after Dad left, maybe even before. Mom always said ballet had taught her that perfection wasn't optional. It was survival. When I was little, I thought that meant she'd teach me grace. But by the time I was 13, I understood it meant she'd watch me with the eyes of a choreographer who never put down her clipboard. The Whitmore house looked normal enough from the outside. 2 stories, a neat yard, roses climbing up a trellis. Inside, it was all polished floors and sharp edges. Every room carried her touch. Vases aligned just so, books stacked by color, a faint scent of lemon polish that made me cough. I used to love sketching the city outside my window, the messy jumble of rooftops and fire escapes, but Mom said I needed to focus on things that mattered. One Thursday in September, I came home with a geometry test clutched in my sweaty hand. 86%. Not bad. My friend Mariah had gotten 72 and was thrilled. I slipped it onto the counter, hoping Mom wouldn't notice. She noticed everything. Her lips tightened the second she saw the red pen. "We don't accept mediocrity in this house," she said, her voice calm in a way that chilled me more than if she had yelled. That night turned into hours of torture disguised as discipline. She made me sit at the dining room table, her tablet propped up to record, and redo every problem. I had to explain each step out loud, like some hostage reciting lines. If I hesitated, she snapped. Again, slower. Do you want to embarrass yourself forever? The clock ticked past midnight. My hands cramped, my stomach growled, but I wasn't allowed to eat or use the bathroom. Tears slipped down my face and smudged the paper. I'm tired, Mom, I whispered once. Her eyes flashed. Tired? Tired is what you'll be when you're bagging groceries for the rest of your life. Do it again. By the end, my throat burned from swallowing sobs. She turned off the tablet, smoothed her hair, and said, You'll thank me one day. I went to bed numb, clutching my sketchbook under the blanket like contraband. I drew crooked lines, jagged buildings, anything that didn't have to be perfect. In those moments, the city I sketched was the only place I could breathe. The punishment spread like mold. First it was math, then it was everything. I couldn't leave my art supplies on the floor of my room. She made me line them up by color on a shelf. Disorder breeds failure, she'd say, pressing her fingers against the jars of pencils like a drill sergeant inspecting weapons. She corrected how I spoke. If I said like too many times, she'd stop me mid-sentence and force me to start over. If I mispronounced a word, she'd roll her eyes and demand I repeat it until my voice shook. Even dinner conversations became exercises. Articulate, Lila, she'd order. Don't mumble like a street kid. At school, I grew quieter. My friends invited me to birthday parties, but I always said no. I couldn't risk Mom deciding the crowd was unworthy. Teachers noticed how nervous I was, how I flinched when they handed back papers. But no one asked the right questions. I started hiding my grades. If I got less than a 95, I erased the number and rewrote it. I learned how to fake my mom's signature so teachers wouldn't know she hadn't seen my progress reports. But the lies twisted my stomach into knots. I jumped whenever the phone rang, terrified it was school calling home. One night, after she tore apart my English essay for being sloppy, I locked myself in the bathroom and stared at the mirror. My face was pale, my eyes red. I pressed my palm flat against the glass and whispered, This isn't me. But who was I? The girl who laughed too loud with her friends, or the girl who trembled under fluorescent lights at a mahogany table? I didn't know anymore. The nightmares started that fall. I'd dream of sitting in the dining room while Mom's voice echoed from every corner of the house. Wrong. Again. Useless. Sometimes the shadows in the room would move like they were alive, her voice bouncing between them until I woke up in a sweat. In real life, it wasn't much different. One Saturday morning, I tried to sketch on the porch while she cleaned the kitchen. She walked out, saw the drawing, and snatched it from my hands. Buildings? That's what you're wasting time on? There's no future in this, do your homework. It's just a hobby, I muttered. Her voice cut sharp. Nothing is just anything. Everything counts. You either excel or you rot. I wanted to scream. Instead, I shoved my sketchbook under the porch cushion when she wasn't looking. Later, I pulled it out and traced over the faint lines she hadn't torn. Drawing became my rebellion, small and secret. Neighbors sometimes asked if everything was all right. Mrs. Jenkins, who lived across the street, caught me once sitting on the curb with red eyes. Rough day? She asked gently. I nodded, but didn't say more. Mom's warning rang in my head. Never air dirty laundry. So I smiled and said, just tired. But inside I was breaking. Every test felt like a landmine. Every dinner felt like walking on glass. I started biting my nails until they bled. My chest tightened every time I heard her heels click on the hardwood. When I turned 15, I begged to join the art club at school. It's after classes, I said carefully. It won't interfere with homework. She looked at me like I'd asked to quit school altogether. Art club, that's a waste. Unless you're planning to starve in some basement studio, forget it. But Mom, her voice rose. Don't argue. I'm not paying for this house so you can chase childish fantasies. I swallowed the words I wanted to scream. That night I stayed up drawing in the dark, using the glow from my phone as a flashlight. Every pencil stroke felt dangerous, like breaking curfew. By junior year, I was drowning in panic attacks. My hands shook whenever a teacher handed back tests. Sometimes I'd lock myself in the school bathroom just to breathe. One counselor noticed and asked if everything was okay at home. I froze, then lied. I'm fine, just stressed. Mom still recorded study sessions, still criticized every hesitation. The cameras were her proof I was lazy, proof she was right. But to me, they felt like surveillance. Even when she wasn't in the room, I felt watched. When I finally left for college, moving into a tiny apartment downtown, I thought the nightmares would stop. But the smell of lemon polish, the glare of fluorescent lights, the feeling of never being good enough, they followed me. I'm older now, but the shadows of that house still cling to me. I live in Portland, not far from Cedarbrook Drive, yet I rarely pass by. When I do, I see the same roses climbing the trellis, the same neat yard. From the outside, you'd never know what happened inside. I still check my work 3 times before sending it. I still hesitate before speaking, worried I'll sound foolish. At night, I sometimes wake with my mother's voice in my head, reminding me that perfection is the only way to survive. And yet, I draw. My apartment walls are covered in sketches of the city, messy and imperfect. Fire escapes, crooked rooftops, alleys filled with graffiti. My art doesn't make me money, but it makes me feel alive. Every line is mine, not hers. People say scars fade. Maybe. But some scars live under the skin, shaping how you move, how you breathe. My mother's control left me anxious, mistrustful, afraid of mistakes. But it also left me determined to build a life where imperfection is allowed. Sometimes I wonder if she knows, if she understands what she did. But I've stopped waiting for her apology. The house is hers. The shadow is mine to fight. Control disguised as love can leave wounds that never fully heal. Perfection is not the path to worth. It is the fear of imperfection that destroys us. True strength comes from allowing ourselves and those we love to be human. I used to believe my family was perfect. That's the funny thing about childhood, how the walls you grow up inside can feel like a fortress, even when they're crumbling. I remember the way our house in Aberdeen looked under winter skies, tall, gray stone walls streaked with rain, windows glowing yellow against the cold. To the outside world, we were respectable. A lawyer father, a mother who baked bread that perfumed the whole street, a daughter who smiled politely on Sundays at church. People envied us. They didn't know. My father, Robert Morton, was a drinker. Not the kind who stumbled cheerfully home from the pub, but the kind who turned every sip into fuel for rage. I learned early to recognize the rhythm of his footsteps, the dangerous hush before he erupted. Sometimes he threw things. Sometimes his hand found my arm or cheek. The bruises were never obvious. He was careful about that. My mother, Margaret, never stepped between us. She prayed instead, whispering scripture as if verses could shield us from fists. When the night came that he was arrested, I was 17. He'd gone after another man at the pub, swinging with wild, drunken fury until the police dragged him out. For the first time, I thought maybe we were free. He was locked away, and suddenly it was just us, Mom and me. I wanted to breathe again, to believe in second chances. And for a while I did. She seemed strong at first. She told me, "Eliza, we'll be all right. God doesn't break families apart unless he plans to build them back stronger." She said it with her chin high, her voice steady. She took over the bills, polished her smile for the neighbors, and walked into church with me at her side like a survivor. But cracks formed fast. She stopped sleeping. I'd find her scrubbing the floor at 2 in the morning, humming hymns through clenched teeth. She locked our front door with 3 deadbolts, muttering about keeping demons out. And though I told myself it was stress, I could feel something unraveling. "Mom, I whispered one night when I found her polishing the silverware with red, raw hands. "You don't have to do this." She didn't look up. "If I don't, who will? You think anyone cares about us, Eliza? You think God will do it all for us?" Her words chilled me. That wasn't the mother I knew. That wasn't the woman who used to braid my hair before school. I didn't understand then how fast love could twist into something else, how grief and pressure could ferment into madness. And so, in the winter of 1998, I began to lose the mother I loved. By spring, the house felt like a prison. I tried to keep up with school. I loved sketching buildings, dreaming about designing houses one day, a future where walls kept people safe instead of trapping them. But every time I spread my notebooks across the kitchen table, my mother's eyes lingered too long. One evening, she stared at my sketch of a tall glass building. "False kingdoms," she murmured. "What?" I asked. "God doesn't want us building towers to the sky. That's pride, Eliza. That's sin." I laughed nervously. "It's just homework, Mom. It's not the Tower of Babel." Her hand slammed the table so hard my pencils jumped. "Don't mock me. Don't you dare mock the word of God." I froze. She'd never raised her voice to me before. That night I found the sketchbook in the fireplace, pages curling black in the flames. A few days later, Hannah, my best friend since primary school, came over. She wore a red scarf her grandmother had knit. Mom's smile vanished the moment she saw it. "Take that off," she snapped. Hannah blinked. "Excuse me?" "Red is the devil's color. You won't bring curses into this house." "Mom," I hissed. "It's just a scarf." Margaret's eyes narrowed, sharp and glittering. "She won't set foot here again, Eliza. She's plotting against us." Hannah left in tears. I stood there trembling, rage and humiliation flooding me. "You're losing it," I whispered. Her hand flew fast, striking my cheek. I'd felt my father's blows, but this one cut deeper. This one came from the person who was supposed to protect me. Later that night, as she knelt by her bed, rocking back and forth in prayer, I touched the sting on my face and realized my mother was slipping away from me. The neighbors began whispering. First, it was small things. Mom screamed at Mrs. Callahan for asking about the overdue gas bill. She slapped another neighbor who suggested we might need help. Then came the boiling water incident. 2 officers at the door, a polite request for calm, and my mother flinging scalding water at them, shrieking, "You're Satan's soldiers!" I'll never forget the way the officers looked at me afterward, pity mixing with unease. One said, "She needs help, miss. But you can't force her unless she's a danger." "She is a danger," I cried. "Can't you see that?" But the paperwork, the process, the bureaucracy, it all moved slower than her madness. At night she roamed the hallway, whispering prayers, rattling the locks on my door. I lay awake with my heart pounding, certain that one night the muttering would stop and something worse would come. One morning I tried reason. "Mom, please, people are worried. I'm worried. You need rest, maybe a doctor." Her eyes blazed. "You think I'm crazy? You think I don't see what they're doing? They want to tear us apart. They want to steal my angel." "I'm not your angel," I whispered. "I'm your daughter, and I'm scared." For a heartbeat, her face softened, almost human again. Then she turned away, locking herself in the bathroom for hours, chanting until her voice went hoarse. The house no longer smelled of bread. It smelled of bleach and burnt paper. It sounded like locks snapping shut. It felt like love had been buried beneath fear. When social workers came, I thought salvation had arrived. They sat with me at the kitchen table, their pens scratching notes, their voices kind. "Eliza," one said gently, "if your mother doesn't accept treatment, we may have to consider foster care, just until she gets better." Foster care. The word hung heavy. I was nearly grown, but the idea of leaving everything, my room, my sketching pencils, even the haunted walls, felt like losing the last thread of home. "Can't you just help her?" I begged. They tried. But Mom refused. She shouted scripture at them, accused them of being agents of evil. I watched her throw their pamphlets into the fire, eyes wild with triumph. That night I heard her footsteps outside my door again. I pressed my back against the wood, clutching a kitchen knife I'd hidden under my pillow. Her shadow lingered, muttering prayers about purity and obedience. I bit my tongue to keep from screaming. The next day, she cornered me in the kitchen. "If you ever betray me to them, Eliza, if you ever let them take me away, God will punish you. Do you hear me?" Her voice was sharp, but her hands trembled. For the first time, I saw fear in her. Maybe fear of losing control. Maybe fear of herself. "Mom," I whispered, tears spilling. "I just want you back." But she turned away, muttering, "Back is gone. Only forward. Only God." The end came sudden, violent, and inevitable. One night her screaming woke the neighbors. They called the police. By the time the officers forced their way inside, she was throwing dishes at shadows only she could see, her voice hoarse from shrieking about demons crawling through the walls. I stood in the corner, shaking as they restrained her. She clawed at them, her face twisted into something I barely recognized. For a moment, her eyes met mine. There was no hate in them, no recognition, only a wild emptiness that broke me more than any slap ever could. She was admitted to a psychiatric facility under emergency order. Heavy medication dulled her storms. Doctors said she might recover slowly. But for me, there was no going back. I visited sometimes. She would smile, calm and polite, almost normal. But every time I saw it, the possibility that the smile could crack, that the demons she imagined could rise again. I left Aberdeen for university, carrying scars no one could see. On the outside, I was fine. But at night, I heard footsteps in hallways, locks clicking, prayers muttered in the dark. I remembered the woman who once baked bread, the woman who became a stranger with wild eyes. And I knew. Love could turn. Safety could vanish. Family could betray. Madness doesn't always come from strangers in the night. It can grow quietly in the people we love most. Appearances deceive, silence can destroy, and survival sometimes means letting go of the very people we long to save. Trust is precious, but it should never blind us to danger, even when it wears the face of family. I had always known my mother was intense, but I never thought intense could mean terrifying. I'm Vivian Cole, 17 at the time, living in a weathered Victorian on Maple Hollow Road in upstate Vermont. Mom, Eleanor Cole, had always been meticulous, obsessively grooming herself, rearranging furniture, scrubbing surfaces until they shone. People called her elegant, almost otherworldly, but I'd seen the edges of her obsession for years. The way her eyes lingered too long on strangers, the way she whispered to herself while cleaning the basement. I told myself it was harmless, a quirky, if controlling mother. But deep down, I felt unease gnawing at me. It was February of 2018. Snowflakes skated lazily across the street, curling around the old iron fence. I had spent the weekend at my father's cabin, a place of quiet and wood smoke, returning home on Friday afternoon with my backpack slung over my shoulder. The driveway was empty, and the house seemed silent in a way that felt unnatural. I hung my coat and stepped inside. That's when I heard it, a faint thudding from the basement. My chest tightened. "Mom?" I called softly. No answer. I crept toward the basement, gripping the wooden railing as my feet sank into the creaky stairs. The door was heavy, with an old brass lock that usually rattled when I pulled it. Today it seemed immovable. My hands shook as I pushed it open. What I saw made my stomach drop like someone had punched me from the inside. A teenage girl, strapped to a reinforced metal table, blood staining the floorboards around her, eyes wide with terror. My mother stood over her, a scalpel in hand, humming. "Mom, what are you doing?" I screamed, stumbling back, almost tripping over the boxes stacked along the wall. Eleanor turned slowly, her expression calm, almost tender. "Shh. She's just part of the collection." she whispered. The word collection twisted in my mind. I had heard the stories, the local urban legend about a woman who collected victims, leaving houses and families whispering rumors. I had never imagined it could be her, my mother. The woman who had tucked me into bed, braided my hair, made pancakes on Sundays. I didn't know what to do. My hands shook violently, my mind racing. But I knew I couldn't let fear paralyze me. Not with her so close to harming someone. Not with my younger brother Nathan oblivious, still idolizing Mom. I had to be careful. I had to survive. Over the next few days, I acted normal. I joked about recipes, asked about errands, and kept my voice steady, hiding the terror curling in my chest. I watched Mom closely, memorizing her routines, noting the moment she left the house or went to the grocery store. I realized how carefully she had concealed her darkness all these years. Every time she smiled at the neighbors, every time she fussed over me or Nathan, it was an act. Beneath it was something else, something dangerous. I couldn't involve Nathan. He would never understand, and I knew my mother's hold over him ran deep. She was magnetic, convincing. She was also ruthless. Late one night, I explored the basement when she was asleep, guided by a flashlight. Behind a false wall, I discovered glass jars filled with preserved eyes meticulously labeled with dates and names. My stomach churned violently. The realization hit me like a hammer. My mother had been committing these crimes for years. Every missing girl in the county, every unexplained rumor, it was her doing. The collector. And now, she was standing over another terrified teen. I knew I couldn't confront her directly. I had to be smart, plan carefully, and protect myself and the girl. I scavenged supplies over several days, hiding sedatives in my room, marking escape routes, and memorizing the basement layout. I also quietly contacted trusted adults, leaving hints without revealing everything in case something went wrong. The storm hit on a Thursday. Snow whipped against the windows, muffling sounds outside. I seized the opportunity. I lured Mom into the attic under the pretense of a leaking roof. She climbed the narrow stairs with her usual confidence, humming softly. My hands shook as I opened the bottle of sedative, measuring carefully. "Mom, can you help me with the leak?" I asked, voice calm. "Of course, sweetie," she replied, glancing around as if nothing in the house was ever wrong. I administered the medication carefully, waiting until she felt lightheaded, then restrained her gently but firmly. I called 911 immediately. My heart pounded in my ears, but I held the line, explaining everything without hesitation. When the authorities arrived, they were shocked, but it was real. Mom didn't resist at first, her calm, unnerving smile still intact. But as the police uncovered jars, tools, and more evidence, she realized the net had finally closed. After Mom's arrest, the house was sealed, and investigators removed the evidence piece by piece. Victims were identified, families notified. Relief mingled with horror. Nathan refused to believe our mother could do such things. He cried, accused me of lying, and I had no words to console him. I carried the truth like a stone in my chest, heavy, permanent. Therapists tried to help me process the trauma. I couldn't sleep for months, haunted by the girl's screams, the jars, the way Mom's calm voice had concealed pure evil. I avoided mirrors, avoided stages, avoided shadows that lingered too long. Years later, I still walk past abandoned houses and empty streets, my senses sharpened. I notice small oddities, a door left ajar, a shadow that moves oddly, and my heart tightens. But I also survived. I rebuilt my life, attending college, surrounding myself with friends who saw me, not my mother's obsession. I've learned that evil can hide in plain sight, that the people who love you can also have darkness you cannot imagine. I've learned resilience, I've learned caution. But most of all, I've learned the importance of vigilance and action. Sometimes the person who should protect you is the one you must fear most, and only your courage can save those who cannot protect themselves. Appearances can be deceiving. Evil can wear a familiar face, Courage isn't the absence of fear. It's acting despite it. Protecting others sometimes demands sacrifices, quick thinking, and the strength to stand against even the closest of kin. In the end, vigilance, morality, and courage are the shields that keep evil at bay. I used to think our house at 34 Hawthorne Street was safe, that my mom Jessica was just being careful. My name is Max Winslow, and when I was 10, I didn't understand how her anxiety could twist our world into a cage. Mom had always been a nurse, precise, organized, and intensely aware of risk. After a minor car accident she had a few years back, her fear of the world seemed to magnify. She stopped leaving the house alone for long periods, stopped trusting strangers, and slowly, she started treating me like a responsibility that could go wrong at any moment. The backyard was the only place I could breathe, but even that wasn't entirely mine. She chained the gate every morning, double-locked it, and hovered by the kitchen window watching. I'd ride my bike slowly, pretending to explore, but always glancing back at the sliding door, knowing she was there, following my every move. Every car that drove by, every neighbor waving, every dog bark, those were dangers in her mind, threats that could sweep me away. "Don't talk to strangers, Max. You never know who's watching," she yelled one afternoon when I waved to Mr. Perkins, the mailman. Her voice was sharp, trembling, like it carried the weight of all the dangers she imagined. At first, I thought she was just being careful, but soon, her care became rules I couldn't bend. Sleepovers were forbidden, playdates were canceled before they began, and any attempt to communicate with friends outside school was met with suspicion. I hid little things, notes I wrote, sketches of the park, even small toys. Anything she might interpret as a misstep or betrayal was tucked away, secret, silent. Inside, the house smelled like antiseptic and pine cleaner, a scent that seemed permanent and suffocating. Every creak of the floorboards or shadow in the corner felt magnified. Mom had installed cameras in the kitchen and living room, claiming it was for my safety, and I learned to move quietly, whisper quietly, breathe quietly. I became careful without realizing it. The world outside our yard seemed enormous and unpredictable, but inside I was trapped, shrinking smaller with every passing day. School became a place of small rebellions and quiet longing. I'd watch other kids laughing, riding bikes freely, trading jokes with friends. I wanted that, more than anything, but I couldn't reconcile it with Mom's rules. I learned quickly that independence brought punishment. I tried small acts, waving to a friend across the street, leaving a secret note in my backpack, writing letters to Emily down the block. All of it was risky. The first time Mom discovered one of my letters, she went pale. Her hands shook, her face tight with fear. "You can't do this, Max. You don't know what could happen. People are dangerous," she whispered. She confiscated the letters, slammed the closet doors, and installed another camera, this one above my bed. From then on, every step I took in my room felt like being watched, measured, cataloged. Sometimes I tried to argue, to explain that my friends were safe, that I could manage, that I wasn't a child who needed to be watched constantly. But her eyes would widen, pleading, almost desperate, and she'd ask, "Do you want something bad to happen?" I couldn't say no. I nodded. I learned that saying no wasn't just defiance, it was betrayal, proof that I was careless and ungrateful for her protection. At night, the sound of her pacing echoed through the house. I would lie in bed, pretending to sleep, listening to the soft scrape of her shoes against the hardwood, the whisper of her fears drifting under my door. Thunderstorms were the worst. Once, during a violent spring storm, I tried to reach for my sketch pad. She spun on me, eyes wide and trembling. "Do you want something to happen?" she demanded again. I nodded, silent, heart hammering, learning that compliance was survival. It wasn't just the rules. It was the emotional weight, the constant reminder that I might never be safe, that the world outside could destroy me. I loved Mom, but I began to hate her control. And yet, I couldn't escape. Not yet. Not when the walls themselves seemed alive, bending around me, teaching me fear as a lesson. By the time I was 11, my small acts of rebellion became more elaborate. I wrote letters, drew secret maps of the park, sketched the world as it could be without Mom's shadow looming over every step. But Mom always found a way in. One afternoon, she intercepted a note meant for Emily. Her face went white. She shook, muttering, "Max, you can't do this. You can't." She tore the letter into tiny pieces, glancing at me like I'd almost broken something irreparable. I learned that day that survival wasn't about strength. It was about invisibility. I moved quietly, spoke quietly, even when teachers asked questions. At school, I smiled, laughed at appropriate times, did my work. But I never fully joined. Group projects became exercises in anxiety. I hated being touched or leaned on, hated anyone knowing my plans. I became careful, calculating, my personality shrinking into shadows. Mom's protection seeped into every part of me. Even when I was allowed outside, my joy was fractured. The swing set was a trap, the slide a danger. I remembered every story of accidents she told me, every stranger who might steal me, every dog that might bite. Adventure became a word whispered like a curse. And yet, despite everything, I still tried. I hid letters in my closet, sneaked short bike rides when Mom was busy, sometimes peeking over the fence at other kids playing. The taste of freedom was intoxicating, but every infraction brought panic. Mom's sudden presence, her voice slicing through the air, shaking me with fear. Every escape was measured, tentative, a step between terror and hope. It wasn't until middle school that someone outside our home noticed. My art teacher, Ms. Parker, saw the changes in my work. The drawings of locked doors, barred windows, faceless figures, and empty streets spoke louder than I ever could. She asked me gently about them, coaxing me to speak. I did in fragments, whispered admissions of fear and control. Child services intervened, and for the first time I felt a sense of cautious relief. Mom smiled sweetly for the outsiders, claimed she was a devoted, protective parent. But I knew her true feelings, the rage and fear that had fueled every action. For weeks I stayed with a foster family, tasting freedom in small ways, bike rides, laughter, even birthday cake. The sensation of being unmonitored was dizzying. I learned that freedom existed outside Mom's shadow. Still, the lessons she taught lingered. I flinched at raised voices, hesitated around strangers, second-guessed casual kindness. The chains she'd wrapped around my mind were invisible but unyielding, a reminder that control and love can masquerade as one. I realized that trust is learned slowly, that even after safety, fear doesn't vanish immediately. As I grew older, I carried Mom's lessons like a secret weight. College was the first time I truly lived away from her reach. I made friends, joined clubs, even allowed myself laughter without fear. But caution lingered. Every note of kindness made me wary. Every sudden gesture of attention whispered caution. I studied psychology in college, determined to understand what had happened to me, to dissect the fear that had been instilled. I learned the difference between protection and possession, between care and control. I realized that Mom had loved in her way, but her fear had become a cage that nearly stole my childhood. Even now, years later, I look back at the house on Hawthorne Street and see it not as a home, but as a place where love and fear were tangled so tightly that survival meant shrinking within myself. But I also see growth. I see that trust can be rebuilt, that freedom can be reclaimed, that even after years of invisible chains, life can be lived fully, cautiously, but with joy. Love that controls, isolates, or instills fear is not protection. It is possession. True care nurtures independence, trust, and the freedom to grow. Even in the presence of fear, healing and self-liberation are possible. I don't remember the exact moment when my mother's care turned into something else. Maybe it was gradual. like ivy creeping up a wall until you realize the bricks beneath are gone. When I was little, she tucked me in at night, read me stories, and packed my lunches with little notes. But after my dad left when I was 5, the house began to change. It wasn't sudden, more like a slow tightening of strings. By the time I was 12, in the fall of 2023, Pinecrest Avenue felt less like home and more like a drill camp. My mom, Margaret, made sure of that. She ran the house like a commander, and I was her only soldier. Everything had a rule, a place, a schedule. Shoes lined up, homework checked twice, lights out exactly at 9. If I forgot a step, the whole house seemed to shudder under her voice. One evening, I forgot to text her before stopping by my friend's house after school. We were just playing video games, laughing, nothing serious. I didn't think a quick message mattered. But at 7 sharp, there she was at the door, her face pale and tight. "Caleb," she said, her voice low but sharp as glass. "Do you understand the consequences of your actions?" "I'm sorry, Mom, inside. Now." I followed her home, my stomach twisting. She locked my bedroom door from the outside and left me there for hours. I could hear her footsteps in the hallway, steady, measured like a metronome, ticking out my punishment. I tried to call out, but she didn't answer. By the time she unlocked the door, I couldn't tell if I was more angry or ashamed. She didn't yell much. That almost made it worse. Her corrections came in cold sentences. "You must learn responsibility. You can't be trusted if you don't follow rules." The silence between her words was heavier than shouting. That was the start of what I began to think of as the cage. Not a real cage with bars, but something invisible that wrapped tighter every day. Soon it wasn't just curfews or forgotten texts. She checked everything. My messages, my email, even the photos on my tablet. She kept a small notebook where she wrote down my comings and goings, the times I left for school, the times I came back. At first I thought it was just temporary, that she was being overprotective because Dad wasn't around. But then she installed a camera in the living room. "So I can make sure you're safe when I'm at work," she said. But the lens followed me everywhere. Even when she wasn't home, I felt her eyes on me. Friends stopped coming over. One time my friend Jacob came by with his skateboard. We were just hanging out in the driveway when Mom came outside, clipboard in hand. "Caleb has homework scheduled right now," she told him. Jacob looked embarrassed. I mumbled an excuse and went back inside. Later, Mom said, "You don't need distractions, friends will only pull you down." I wanted to scream, but instead I nodded. I found one place she hadn't thought of yet, the attic. I'd sneak up there with a flashlight and a comic book hiding between the dusty boxes. It was the only space where I could breathe. I whispered to myself up there, practicing what I'd say if I ever had the courage to talk back to her. But even that didn't last. One evening, she caught me slipping down the attic ladder. Her eyes narrowed. "What were you doing up there?" "Nothing, just looking around." She didn't believe me. The next day, I heard the sound of a new lock clicking into place. School became the only place I felt normal, though even there I carried her voice in my head. I sat up straighter than anyone else, raised my hand at every question, double-checked every answer. Teachers thought I was disciplined. The truth was I was terrified of mistakes, but the anxiety followed me. During group projects, I froze if I thought I might mess up. Once, while building a model for science class, I glued a piece wrong and my hands shook so bad I couldn't fix it. My partner, Emily, looked at me and whispered, "It's just glue, Caleb, relax." I wanted to tell her that glue wasn't the problem. Mistakes weren't allowed in my house. Mrs. Turner, my homeroom teacher, eventually pulled me aside. "You're always so tense, Caleb. Is something going on at home?" I shook my head, forcing a smile. "I'm fine." But I wasn't. Nights were the worst. I'd lie in bed staring at the ceiling, waiting for the sound of her footsteps. Sometimes I heard her whispering outside my door. "If I don't keep order, everything falls apart, everything." I started to wonder if maybe she was right. Maybe if I followed every rule perfectly, nothing bad would happen. Maybe I really was the problem. That's how the cage worked. It made me question my own thoughts, my own judgment. Things escalated when she installed another camera, this time in my bedroom. "It's for your safety," she said. "You need supervision to stay on track." I wanted to shout that it wasn't safety, it was prison. But instead I nodded, pretending to accept it. That night I pulled the blanket over my head, trying to block out the little red light glowing from the corner. One evening I left my shoes by the couch instead of the rack by the door. She stood over them like they were evidence of a crime. "Caleb," she said, "what does this say about your respect for order?" I forgot. I'll move them. Forgotten rules are broken rules. She made me stand in the corner holding the shoes above my head until my arms shook. I could hear Maya, our neighbor's daughter, laughing outside in the yard. The sound felt like something from another universe. I began to lie to survive. I told her I had no homework when I did, just so I could sneak into the attic for a few stolen minutes. I told her my friends were too busy to hang out, when the truth was they stopped inviting me. Each lie made me sick with guilt, but it was the only way I could breathe. By then, even silence felt dangerous. I didn't break free all at once. It was more like small cracks forming until the whole wall gave way. One day at school, I had a panic attack during a math quiz. My chest tightened, and I couldn't breathe. Mrs. Turner rushed over, kneeling beside my desk. "Caleb, look at me. You're safe." Safe. The word sounded unreal. Later, I told her everything. The cameras, the rules, the punishments. I thought she'd tell me I was exaggerating, but she just nodded and said, "You did the right thing telling me." Social workers got involved after that. They came to the house asking questions, looking through notebooks. Mom tried to smile her way through it, presenting herself as just a strict parent, but they saw enough to understand. I ended up staying with my dad for a while. His apartment was small and messy, but for the first time I could breathe. I ate cereal at midnight. I left my shoes in a heap by the door. I stayed up late reading comics without feeling guilty. Still, the cage came with me. I flinched at every sudden noise. I sat rigid at the dinner table, waiting for rules that never came. Even years later, in high school, I carried that fear. I wanted freedom, but I didn't know what to do with it. I became a writer, chasing the stories I once whispered to myself in the attic. Words became my way out, even if Mom's voice still echoed in the back of my mind. Not good enough. Not perfect. I keep writing anyway. Love without trust suffocates, and control without compassion becomes cruelty. What my mother called discipline was really fear dressed as care. A child cannot grow inside an invisible cage. They only learn to doubt themselves. Freedom may be messy, imperfect, and uncertain, but it is where love truly lives. I used to think my home was normal. My name is Samantha Devereaux, and I grew up in a colonial house at 12 Bramblewood Lane in Ashford, Maine, where the smell of polished wood and sea salt always seemed to mingle. My mother, Evelyn, was an antique dealer, elegant, precise, and endlessly charming. Everyone in town admired her eye for rare collectibles, but beneath that charm, there was something else, a meticulous control that shaped every corner of our house and gradually, every part of my life. When I was 12, I first noticed it. Mom had a habit of labeling everything, drawers, shelves, even notebooks. She kept logs of my homework, my appointments, my little activities, insisting it was to keep organization from turning into chaos. At the time, I laughed along with her, pretending it was just quirky, the kind of charm that made her lovable. But late at night, I'd hear sounds, a scraping floorboard, a soft shuffling, a whispering that seemed to drift from the locked room on the second floor. Every time I asked about it, Mom would wave her hand and say, "The wind, Samantha, the wind in the old house settling." I wanted to believe her. I wanted to think that everything was safe, normal. But the room called to me. I could feel it in my stomach, a prickle of fear mixed with curiosity. I started paying attention to small things, changes in the arrangement of furniture, notes I thought I'd left on my desk that vanished, photographs that seemed to move slightly when I wasn't looking. A sense that someone was quietly shaping the world around me began to settle in my chest. I tried to act normal during the day. At school, I laughed with friends, answered questions, smiled when teachers called my name. But when I got home, the air was thick with tension. Mom always knew where I was, what I was doing, even what I was thinking, it seemed. She had the kind of watchfulness that isn't protective, it's controlling. And the locked room was the anchor of it. A silent, ominous presence that reminded me I wasn't truly free. By the time I was 14, the patterns were unmistakable. Mom monitored everything. I stopped leaving my diary lying around, started hiding notes in the lining of my backpack, whispered even in my own room. Every movement, every small rebellion was a test, and Mom's vigilance ensured that I failed them all. One rainy Thursday, I couldn't resist anymore. The creaking stairs seemed louder than usual, the house colder, and the locked room as always called. I approached the door, my hand trembling as I turned the key in the old brass lock. The click sounded impossibly loud. I pushed the door open, and a musty, dimly lit room appeared. The walls were lined with journals, meticulously arranged and labeled. I picked one up, my fingers shaking. It was horrifying. The handwriting, detailed manipulation, careful recordings of events that weren't just in the house but in my life, my own life. Pages cataloged conversations I was certain had happened differently. Notes detailed small mistakes and moments I didn't remember committing. I slammed the journal shut, but my curiosity was already a fire I couldn't put out. I began watching Mom more closely. I noticed how she rearranged objects, deleted emails I thought were private, subtly adjusted details in stories she told. I realized she had been shaping reality, not just for me but for herself, rewriting moments to maintain her control. I felt trapped in a world that I couldn't trust, where memories could be false and even my perception unreliable. Confrontation came sooner than I expected. One night I asked her directly, my voice shaking, "Mom, why are you rewriting everything? Why do you do this?" She looked at me, calm, almost tender. "To protect you, darling. To keep our world safe." "Some people can't handle the truth," she said softly. Her words were meant to soothe, but all they did was chill me to the bone. The person I had trusted completely, who had guided every choice I made, was also the person who had been controlling and altering my reality for years. I started documenting my own life in secret. I wrote down conversations immediately, hid notes under floorboards, recorded sounds on my phone. Every interaction became a puzzle. I began doubting what I remembered, doubting whether my instincts were accurate. The weight of it made sleep nearly impossible. Every creak, every whisper, every step in the old house felt like surveillance, and I began shrinking inside my own mind. High school was a strange mix of freedom and paranoia. I started college applications, extracurriculars, and even a part-time job, all the while keeping a mental catalog of every encounter, every decision that could be manipulated. I developed an almost hyper-aware sense of control over myself, a survival instinct honed by years of psychological restriction. Eventually, I made the decision to leave. The first night alone in my college dorm was liberating and terrifying. I could unpack without fear of rearrangement, speak to friends without monitoring, and live without someone rewriting my life. But the fear never fully left. The locked room in Bramblewood Lane, the journals, the subtle manipulations, they were still alive in my mind. They had taught me vigilance, suspicion, and caution, but they had also taught me resilience. Even now, years later, I feel the shadows of my upbringing. Certain scents, creaks, or whispers bring a jolt of unease. I've learned to rebuild trust, but cautiously, with layers of observation and patience. The world outside the colonial house is vast, unpredictable, and yes, sometimes unsafe. But not because someone is manipulating it behind locked doors. I've learned the difference between protection and control, between care and obsession. Leaving wasn't just about escaping a house. It was about reclaiming my mind, my sense of reality, and my right to exist without constant oversight. I learned to trust my memory, document my life, and recognize manipulation before it can take root. Freedom, I realized, is not just leaving a place. It's being allowed to trust your own mind. Control disguised as care can trap a person's mind as effectively as any physical barrier. True love nurtures independence and trust, rather than rewriting reality to maintain power. Escaping such manipulation is possible, but healing and reclaiming autonomy require vigilance, courage, and self-belief. When I think back on that summer of 2024, I sometimes wonder if the house found me rather than the other way around. I had just signed the divorce papers in April, my hands trembling as I scrawled my name across the final page. Owen and I packed up what little we could carry from our cramped rental and drove through the misty hills of Ashwood, Oregon, until we reached 89 Pineview Crescent. It looked like a postcard-perfect craftsman, all wide porches and oak floors that glowed under the realtor's staged lights. I told myself it was a fresh start, a place where my son and I could breathe again. But the truth is, I was desperate. Desperate to prove to Owen that I could give him a home after his father's betrayal shattered what little stability we had left. I told him this house would be ours, a fortress where nothing bad could touch us. The first night, I tucked him into his new room with its pale blue walls and freshly laundered sheets. He whispered, "It smells too clean." I laughed it off, telling him it was just varnish, but the words lodged somewhere in my chest. In those early weeks, I obsessed over details, curtains drawn at just the right angle, photos hung in neat rows, cabinets scrubbed until they gleamed. Control became my shield. I thought if I made everything perfect, nothing could fall apart again. But Owen, he was different. Quiet, watchful, sketching in the margins of his notebooks. It didn't take long before little things unsettled me. A cup left out when I knew I'd washed them all. A door that drifted open though I'd shut it tight. At night, when the house exhaled with its settling wood, I thought I heard whispers faint and curling up from the attic. I forbade Owen from going up there. "It's dusty, it's dangerous," I told him, but forbidding something is often the same as planting it like a seed. He began asking questions. "What's up there? Why can't I see it?" The more I brushed him off, the more his eyes lingered on the narrow pull-down ladder in the hallway ceiling. I should have known then that secrets, once stitched into a house, will always come unraveled. It was a rainy Thursday when I first caught Owen whispering to himself in the backyard. He sat hunched by the tree line, sketchpad on his knees, lips moving as though in conversation. When I called out, he jumped, slamming the notebook shut. "Who were you talking to?" I asked. He shook his head, eyes wide. "No one." That night, I found his sketchbook left open on the coffee table. Page after page was filled with dark shapes. Tall, spindly figures crouching in the corners of rooms, their limbs stretching like shadows under a street lamp. When I asked about them, he muttered, "They wait in the attic." His voice was so certain it chilled me. I told myself kids have imaginations, that divorce had scrambled his sense of safety, that the move was too much too fast. Still, unease pressed against me. I began checking the locks 3 times a night, making rounds through the house with a flashlight. Every time I passed beneath the attic door, I felt something heavy in my chest. Then came the evening I found the front door unlocked. Panic jolted through me like electricity. I ran room to room calling Owen's name until my throat burned. Silence answered. Then faintly, a glow leaked from the attic. I climbed the ladder, my heart hammering. There he was, cross-legged on the wooden boards, surrounded by his toys, books torn apart, papers scattered. His eyes were wide, pupils blown. "Owen," I whispered, kneeling beside him. "What are you doing up here?" "They won't let me sleep," he said. His small hand pointed to a corner where the shadows pooled darker than they should. For a moment, I thought I saw them too, shapes shifting in the dim light. I blinked, and the corner was empty. I told myself it was fatigue, stress, a trick of the eyes. But I carried him downstairs, clutching him so tightly he squirmed. I promised it would all be fine. I didn't believe it myself. The house began to turn against us. Doors slammed when no windows were open. Objects toppled from shelves. At night I lay awake listening to footsteps that creaked across the upstairs hall, though no one moved. Owen grew restless. His drawings became more frantic, filled with figures that crowded around the house, pressing in from every angle. At school, teachers called me about his distraction, his distant eyes. I told them it was the divorce, that he just needed time. Inside, I feared it was something worse. One night I stayed awake in his room, determined to prove to myself nothing was wrong. Around midnight he stirred, eyes snapping open as though he'd been listening for something. He whispered, "Do you hear them?" At first I heard nothing but the rain tapping the window. Then, a faint murmur, like words I couldn't quite catch, threading through the air. My skin prickled. I grabbed the flashlight and stormed up the ladder to the attic. Light sliced through the dark, catching only dust and old boards. But the feeling that someone had just stepped aside, just out of reach, crawled over me. When I turned back, Owen was gone. I tore through the house, screaming his name, flinging open closets, checking the yard, the street. Nothing. My heart pounded so hard I thought I'd collapse. I called the police, my voice shaking, words tumbling out. Hours later, they found no sign of forced entry, no footprints in the mud outside. They searched the woods, the neighborhood. Nothing. The only thing they left me with were their questions, their skeptical looks. I collapsed on the couch, the silence pressing in on me, the house humming with a presence I could no longer deny. Days blurred into weeks. My job slipped through my fingers. I missed deadlines, ignored calls, forgot meetings. Friends stopped visiting, wary of the dark circles under my eyes and the paranoia that edged my voice. But the house never let me rest. At night, I swore I heard Owen's footsteps running across the hall. I'd fling open the door, begging for him to be there. Only silence greeted me. Sometimes I heard him call faintly from the attic. "Mom." I'd rush up, nearly breaking my neck on the ladder, only to find empty boards and shadows that seemed to pulse with life. Neighbors mentioned seeing a boy in the woods alone at night. "Looked like your son," one said casually, sipping his coffee. My heart froze. I couldn't remember. The night Owen vanished, had I been with him? Had I imagined the attic light, the whispering corner? The line between memory and dream blurred. My reflection in the mirror looked like a stranger. Wild-eyed, pale, hair tangled. I began to wonder if Owen had ever been here at all, or if my mind, fractured by divorce and exhaustion, had built him from longing and fear. But then I'd open his sketchbook, pages still filled with those figures, and I knew he had been real. At least once. By autumn, the house consumed me. Every creak was a footstep. Every shadow reached for me. I stopped leaving. Work vanished. Bills piled up. Still, I walked the halls at night, calling for my son. Sometimes, in the silence, I'd hear him answer. Sometimes I'd see his face flash in the corner of my eye just before the dark swallowed him again. I sat in the attic once for hours, the air thick with dust, waiting for something to happen. At some point, I realized I was speaking out loud. "Give him back. Take me instead." My voice cracked, desperate. Nothing answered. Only the whisper of the house settling, the soft brush of wind through the eaves. Now, months later, I no longer know where reality ends. Was Owen taken by something in the house or by the chaos of my own unraveling mind? All I know is that the attic waits. It always waits. Some nights, I swear I hear a boy's laughter drifting from the woods. I press my hand against the window, my chest aching with hope and terror. Maybe he's out there. Maybe he's gone. Maybe I've been chasing shadows all along. But the house, our perfect home, my fortress, has teeth, and it holds every secret I never wanted to face. Sometimes the greatest dangers are not in the shadows of a house, but in the shadows we carry within ourselves. Fear, guilt, and the need for control can consume us, turning love into obsession and memory into madness. To truly protect those we love, we must first confront the darkness inside.